So today we are going to be taking notes on cells. Before we begin taking notes, I'm going to review with you the modern cell theory. When I'm done reviewing the modern cell theory, then we're going to start to discuss the characteristics of prokaryotic cells. At that point, you're going to start taking notes on your paper. The two types of prokaryotic cells are archaea and bacteria, and we'll talk about both of those. And then we're going to talk about the structure and function of prokaryotic cells. So remember, once we start talking about prokaryotic cells, that's when you're going to take notes. And I'll remind you again when we get to that point that you need to take notes. When we are reviewing the modern cell theory, you do not need to be taking any notes. So first, the modern cell theory is that all living things are made of cells. The second part is a cell is the smallest unit in all living things. And the third part is all cells come from pre-existing cells. So first, we're going to be talking about the very first sentence here. So first, all living things are made of cells. So all living things meaning any animals like a lion, a dog, a spider, any plants, but also things like fungi, like mushrooms are a fungi that are made of cells. Also, even if you have ever had ringworm, a lot of athletes tend to get this. It's a fungus that can be spread through skin-to-skin contact. That is even a living thing. Mold on bread is a living thing. And even like animals with bioluminescence or jellyfish, those are also living things and they're all made of cells. So everything you see here on this screen is in fact made of cells. So all living things are made of cells. The second part of the modern cell theory is a cell is the smallest unit in all living things. So if you were to look at the human body, the human is obviously a living organism. So if you look at our former president, Barack Obama, and you were to zoom in all the way into his muscles, you'd see that muscles are made of cells, or bones are made of cells, or the stomach is made of cells. So in this example, we're just going to kind of zoom in on his muscle tissue or his muscle system. And then if you kind of zoom in more, even closer to this group of muscles that can be found right here in the leg, and you continue to zoom in closer to the muscle fibers, and then go even closer, you see that the muscle fibers are made of cells. And then the muscle fibers create these groups of muscles, which then create multiple muscles, which then create your muscle system, which then allows you to walk and function. So the cell is the smallest living unit in all living things. And then all cells come from pre-existing cells. This is the last part of the modern cell theory. So each cell starts off as just one single cell. At some point, it's going to start to divide, and it'll start to divide or replicate its organelles. So there'll be two of everything. And then you can see here it starts to kind of pull away from each other. Here we see a big split in the middle. Here we see our two nuclei or nucleuses forming. And then here we see a split happening between the two cells. So this one cell here now became two new cells. So again, the modern cell theory is all living things are made of cells. The cell is the smallest unit in all living things, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. All right, so now we're going to be talking about the types of cells. So we have prokaryotes over here and eukaryotes over here. Today in this lecture, we're just going to be talking about these ones over here, the prokaryotes. So at this point, this is when you're going to want to start taking notes. This is when we start here in just a second on prokaryotes. And you'll see on the paper that you have, your notes are going to match this, and then you'll have little sections where you're going to write it on your notes. So the first part, we'll start from the top and we'll move down. So the first thing here, it says no nucleus. So prokaryotes have no nucleus. The nucleus is what holds DNA. So in prokaryotes, since there's no nucleus, the DNA just floats in the middle of the cell. Also, prokaryotes have no membrane-bound organelles. So as you can see on your notes, you should have a box right here, and you'll go ahead and write these 2 sentences. And you can pause the video if you need to make sure you get these sentences written. The next part, if we continue to move down this flow chart, is that prokaryotes are smaller. Prokaryotes are much smaller than eukaryote cells. So they are the smaller of the two. Next, we continue to scroll down and we see unicellular. Unicellular means it is a living organism made of one single cell. So some organisms are made of multiple cells like humans or plants, whereas these organisms, it's just one cell that can survive and thrive and live all on its own without anything else. So like it says right here, a unicellular organism can live totally on its own. And it is made of one single cell. And you can remember this because uni in unicellular, uni means one. Similar to the word unicycle, unicycle means one cycle, or one-wheeled cycle. So a bike with one wheel would be a unicycle. So here, unicellular means a living organism with just one cell. So unicellular means one cell. Another interesting fact about prokaryotes is that there are a lot more prokaryotes in the world than eukaryotes. So just here, a little interesting fact, there are more prokaryotic cells on Earth than eukaryotic cells. So if you were to individually count all the prokaryotic cells and individually count all the eukaryotic cells, there's more prokaryotes than eukaryotes. All right, as we move down the flowchart, you see that archaea and bacteria, these are the 2 types of prokaryotic cells. And then we're going to get into more details on what these 2 things are. So archaea, again, on your notes, you should have a box down at the very bottom of your notes that will list what archaea is and what bacteria is. So first with archaea, they live in extreme environments. So they can live in really high pressure places like deep in the ocean where you have all that weight from the water kind of sitting on those. So they can live in very deep places in the ocean. They can live in extreme heat like hot springs or geysers. They can live in extreme cold like in the Arctic. Or they can live in very acidic locations. So remember, archaea, which I want you to write at the very top of your notes, live in extreme environments. So in environments that most other things wouldn't be able to survive. Next, we have bacteria. We've all heard of bacteria. And we tend to think that bacteria is just a bad thing. But in fact, bacteria can be good or bad. And it's important to remember that bacteria lives everywhere. Bacteria is found all over. It's found inside your body, on the outside, on your hands, on the table. It's found everywhere. And remember, it can be good, such as the bacteria that lives in our stomach. We have a lot of bacteria that helps us digest food, a lot of bacteria that helps us fight infections. So there's good bacteria, but there's also bad bacteria, such as, bacteria that makes us sick. We tend to refer to this bacteria as germs. The next slide, we're going to start talking about the structure of a prokaryotic cell. So the structure and the function of a prokaryotic cell. So you can see here we have, 7 different structures we're going to talk about in a prokaryotic cell. So the first one here is the capsule. This is the outermost layer of a prokaryotic cell. And on your notes, you'll want to copy what the capsule does. The capsule protects the cell from being eaten. It's a waxy kind of material, and it kind of protects the cell from being eaten or being destroyed by any maybe like cleaners or something like that. So it protects the cell, the capsule. The second one is the flagellum. And you can remember that the flagellum spins around and helps the cell to move. So these things, they kind of work as like a little tail or like a fin. So they help move the cell from place to place. And if you can imagine like the propellers or the blades on a helicopter, or those spin in circles to move the helicopter from place to place. The flagellum works in a similar way. It spins really quick to move the cell around. The next one is the fimbriae, which is right here. These are little pieces that kind of stick off the cell that go all the way around the cell. And these help the cells stick to each other. So they help the cells stick together or help the cells stay in a certain location. So when you eat and you get food going through your digestive system, going through your stomach and your intestines, you have bacteria that help you digest food. Well, you don't want that bacteria to leave your stomach. So in that bacteria, they have fimbriae to help that bacteria stay in the stomach. If you don't have that bacteria, you're not going to be able to digest your food. So the fimbriae is important in keeping cells sticking together. It kind of works like Velcro, keeping them sticking together. Next is our DNA, which, like we said earlier, just floats around in the middle of the cell. And DNA is simply just your genetic material. So kind of what makes each cell different from other cells. Next, you have your cell wall, which helps maintain the shape of the cell so the cell can't get destroyed or bend or get too big or too small. It kind of helps maintain the shape of the cell. Similar to like the bones in our body, they help maintain our shape. That's kind of what the cell wall does. Next, you have your ribosomes. Your ribosomes are found in all cells, and they're just kind of these little dots that you see floating around in the middle of the cell. Ribosomes are important because they make proteins, and proteins are what DNA is made of. So that's why ribosomes are so important, because if you didn't have ribosomes, you wouldn't have DNA. And lastly, you have your cell membrane, which is this darker gray going around here. And the cell membrane controls what goes in and out of the cell. So sometimes the cell needs to get rid of waste, or the cell needs to take in nutrients, and the cell membrane allows for that to happen. So it allows for things to go in or out of the cell. And that is so far all the information you need to know about prokaryotic cells or prokaryotes. So remember, no nucleus. So the DNA just floats around. They're a lot smaller than eukaryotic cells. And remember, a way to remember that they have no nucleus is that the word pro rhymes with no. So pro, no, meaning no nucleus. They are unicellular, so they're just one single cell. And then there's two types, archaea and bacteria. Archaea lives in extreme environments. Bacteria can be good or bad, and it is found everywhere. And then tomorrow we'll be talking about eukaryotic cells. So today we talked about prokaryote. Tomorrow we'll talk about eukaryote.